Guys, Legionnaire Archery here. Today I'm going to be sharing some tips on how to cut a stave, a bow stave, to make two bows out of one stave. So stay tuned. Guys, so I got a couple of tips here for you today. I'm going to give you the guidance you need to make sure that you cut a stave in order for you to get a couple of bows, because obviously, as we know, if you don't have the luxury of cutting your own bow staves, if the area that you live in does not have plenty of bow wood, or maybe you're buying a stave like an Osage stave, and the stave, you know, they usually, when you buy staves, they have a lot of meat on them, and it's gonna depend on the bow that you're trying to make. So here we go with tip number one. So tip number one when it comes to cutting down your bow stave is you got to know the designs of the bows that you're going to make. The reason you want to make sure you know the designs is, for example, I've got this bow stave right here. It's an Osage bow stave. It's pretty thick. It's about 4 inches, 3.5 to 4 inches in thickness. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split this stave down the middle, pretty much, or I'm gonna cut it down the middle. I don't want to split it, because splitting, you know, it can take too much meat from both of the splits, and then you end up with nothing. So I'm going to cut it on the bandsaw. But when I say that you need to know your design, that's because if you're making a bow that has a thick handle, then this bow stave would not have enough wood here for two bows. It would only be sufficient for one bow because of the thickness of the handle. Actually, you might still be able to get away with cutting a smaller piece. However, it's not gonna yield a higher poundage bow, maybe something 30 and under. With Osage, maybe you might get 40, just because it's such a strong wood. But that's tip number one. Know your design so that you know your layout of what you're going for, and you don't end up cutting too much wood and ruining one of the staves, or your good stave at least. So you at least always want to have one good side in order for it not to, you know, go to waste. Lay out your line there, and make sure you cut with the grain. Do not cut across the grain. So for example, when you have some of the valleys, some of the mountains and valleys through your stave, you want to follow that contour. So if you see I laid out my stave and I'm following the contour of the grain, that's what you want to do, so that you don't ruin your stave. And also, you got one last thing here. Alright guys, tip number three. Tip number three is, if you are cutting a stave like Osage orange, you gotta make sure you take into account your rings. If you have a lot of large rings, like is the case with this piece, I don't know if you can see the rings, but the rings on this piece of wood are actually pretty substantial. They're pretty large. So I'm gonna be able to make two south bows out of this, because I can follow the rings on my top piece, and then on my bottom piece I could probably follow the ring as well, and it'll probably yield another south bow. If you cannot follow the ring on the stave that you cut from under the stave, from the piece you cut from under the stave, then you want to back that bow. You can always use the top to make a south bow, but then the center, you need to make sure you back it if you violated some of the rings. Alright guys, those are the 3 tips that I have. cutting the stave, I ended up with two pieces. Now, one of the pieces, which was my main piece, the one on top, that one is absolutely gonna make the bow that I wanted to make, which was initially a Cherokee style D-bow with some recurve. So there's plenty of meat left in this stave to make it into one of those bows. I wanted to get the same type of bow from the other stave. However, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get that, just because on the end here, it's actually pretty thin. And so unless I want a 25-30 pound bow, I won't be able to make the same type of bow as I would with the other stave that's a little bit thicker. Now, I can do with this is I can cut it down and I can make a different type of bow, which is probably what I'm gonna end up doing. However, I did manage to save, you know, some wood from this piece, from the whole stave. I didn't want this to go to waste. Oftentimes what you do is you get a thick stave, you end up working on both sides, meaning you end up taking material until you whittle it down to what you're making, and you know that really wastes a lot of energy, a lot of material. Now, the only reason I'm able to do this is because I have a bandsaw, and so a bandsaw is probably one of the best tools that you can have in your bowyer's workshop. If you're a beginner, then obviously you don't have access to a bandsaw probably, and so you know they can be expensive. The one I got, which I got recently, is a bandsaw from Harbor Freight, and it's a 14-inch bandsaw. It cuts like a charm, and it was only about $400. It's $375 plus tax, so it ended up being around 400 bucks when everything was said and done. Now, if you're going to be making bows for a while, you may want to invest in one of those bandsaws, and you know, make sure you get the most out of your wood. So I thought this would be helpful. Make sure you give the video a thumbs up and share the video if you like it, if you enjoy it. Post a comment down below. I'll be reading